Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, we're back, and today we're going to do something a little different. Then again, I always say we're going to do something a little different, and then we wind up doing the same thing over and over again. So, let's just sort of hop into it. Actually, no. Already my mind has left me. Before we begin, I wanted to, I wanted to show off. So I am on Fantagraphics mailing list. I've mentioned Fantagraphics before. They're the collection that publishes a lot of Robert Crumb's books. The complete Zap Comics was published out by them. The last video I believe we did was Life and Times of Fritz the Cat by Robert Crumb. Again, this is a Fantagraphics book. And they were doing one of their yearly sales. I believe it was either 20 or 40% off. It was a really big sale, and naturally I hit it up. And I'm really excited because I picked up two books. The first of which was I Know What I Am, The Life and Times of Artemisia Gentileschi by Gina Siciliano. And I probably butchered both of those names. I apologize, art history nerds. I assure you my mom is one of you, and she will give me all manner of grief as soon as she sees this video. Anyway, though, this book is effectively a biography of the Renaissance painter Artemisia Gentileschi. Her life, the controversy surrounding her art tutor who raped her when she was a young girl, and it just gets into her life, her art, and just sort of it's a biography in graphic novel form. And if the cover isn't suggested enough, this book is visually stunning. There's a reference section in the back that I can't wait to dig into. This book is wonderful. I can't wait to read it, talk about it here on the channel. I can't wait to read it, period. And the second book I got is also one I'm super excited about, and that is The Frank book by Jim Woodring. Now, if you've never read Frank, it's weird. Said the guy with an Eraserhead poster on his wall. But seriously, Frank is simply one of the most peculiar books you will ever read in your entire life. And the Frank book is interesting, not simply because it provides color images. Most of the time, these comics are published in black and white, but just because Frank is one of the oddest creations in terms of the history of comics. There's just no describing sometimes the eccentric, peculiar, and at times haunting visions that just sort of amass in this book. Frank is simply an obligatory read for anyone who loves comics. And I guarantee you, we're going to talk about this book and another Frank book that I've got in my collection at some point. I'm hoping to actually get all of them. And actually, Jim Woodring just put out a new addition to the Frank series that I want to buy, but I keep spending my money on other things, so you know what? We'll deal with it when we get to it. All right, so now that I've shown off, what is today's video actually about? Well, as I mentioned before in a couple videos, I work at a public library, and one aspect of my job is people come in and asking me, hey, would you recommend a book? And that's hard, especially for somebody like me. Usually, I tend to be very reserved. I'm not really used to people in my interpersonal life asking me, hey, what do you like to read? And what are you reading right now? Or what do you think about X, Y, or Z? So opening up to people can regularly be a challenge. The fact that I make these videos, trust me, is something momentous in and of itself. But if you work in a library, and particularly if you work in the reference department, this is a daily task that you meet because people walk into a library and they expect you to know every single book that is on the shelf. And that can be hard, especially for somebody like me who's shy, but then also, too, who tends to read mostly comic books. Now, there are ways to help you in this job, which is something known as Reader's Advisory Material. That's a library science term, and yeah, there's such a thing as library science. I had no idea when I first started the job, but it's a thing, and it's a daily part of your job. It's just helping people figure out what it is they want to read. And it sounds difficult and challenging, but honestly and truthfully, once you perform something known as a reference interview, aka just talking to the person, asking them, what do you normally like to read? Who are your favorite authors? You know, is there something particular that you're looking for? Are you looking for a biography? Are you looking for a mystery? Are you looking for a horror book? Are you looking for science fiction? What have you. By simply talking to the person, you can sort of gauge what they're looking at. Nevertheless, you still need some kind of tools. And this is where we get into something that I'm honestly not a fan of, but something that's really interesting when we talk about comics and books and media, period, which is lists. Which also leads me to the topic of today's video, the 100 greatest graphic novels, the good, the bad, and the epic by Katrina Hill and Alex Langley. This is a book that if you've ever been to like a half-price books, a Barnes & Noble, or even just like a hole-in-the-wall half-price books, or hole-in-the-wall bookshop, period, you probably have seen this book in the comics section. Because there's usually going to be a section where there'll be a bunch of graphic novels, there'll be a bunch of biographies of famous individuals in comics, and then just sort of general books about comics. And these are usually like big coffee table-sized books that are like just collection of photographs about Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman. Maybe some Marvel characters, and then maybe some Mickey, we'll just say a certain rodent who's represented by a company that will sue you if you do things the wrong way. Spill some of that tea and get back to the point. The 100 Greatest Graphic Novels of All Time is effectively reader's advisory material. The book is simply a collection of well over about 100 graphic novels that have been published just ever, period. Each section of the book is oriented towards a particular focus. So if you open it up, you'll see in the table of contents Langley and Hill break it up according to various genres. So Chapter 1 is superheroes, Chapter 2 is horror, Chapter 3 is Know Thyself-y, coming-of-age stories, historical literature, fantasy, modern drama, odds and ends, graphic novels, and comics, the visual art. This section, or each of these chapters, is designed simply to allow the reader the opportunity to discover what are some of the, air quote, greatest comics in a particular genre. And I'll get onto that in just a second. But, nevertheless, when we talk about lists in comics, this can be really difficult because we have to design or decide for ourselves, what are we looking for, what do we want? And this is exactly everything that Reader's Advisory is about. Now, before we get into it, I want to make one small tangent, and I promise small, about the word greatest, at least in relation to comics and then art in general. All right. So, in relation to the aspect of greatest, I just wanted to sort of impart one small sort of... This is a little thing that grinds my gears, if I can quote Peter Griffin here for a moment. One of the things that sort of continually irks me is the use of the word greatest. And I have to acknowledge moving forward, Hill and Langley, I don't believe, are trying to make any sort of implied objective statement. I don't really believe they're trying to become like the dogmatic, axiomatic, canon-driven, blah, 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 blah. This is a book. It's designed to sell a couple copies and bring attention to the medium of comics, and this is a good starting point, which is something I'm going to talk about immediately after this tangent. For my own part, though, I really am not a big fan of lists, personally, largely because there seems to be an implied value judgment. One of the things you really learn a lot about when you go to graduate school, and honestly, even just in life as well, is especially when you're talking about art, the phrase greatest can be an extraordinarily dubious position. I think Robert Crumb is one of the greatest comics or cartoonists out in the field working today. Likewise, there are people that would be more than happy if every comic and artwork that Robert Crumb has ever made was burned up and forgotten for the rest of humanity, and that if we all just dropped every other comic and simply started reading The Boys or Preacher. It exists. That person exists, and that's because art and comics, being in the field of art, is a subjective medium, or it's just a subjective structure in our society. What I think is interesting is not what you are going to think is interesting or what somebody else is going to think is interesting. And so implying the term great, especially into art, can be difficult because we then have to ask ourselves the important questions is, who is compiling this list? How are they defining what is great? How are we defining greatness in this point? Because are we talking great in terms of artwork, great in terms of writing, great in terms of combination of artwork and writing, great because of how many copies they've sold, great in terms of their sort of introspective cultural appeal, the fact that they sort of voided cultural appeal? There's so many qualities to art that can be great. And so when you're trying to collect all graphic novels under the title of great and then try to assign numbers to them, it becomes a rather difficult proposition. One of the good things about this book is it doesn't sort of create a number system of, say, Drama by Raina Telgemeier is the #1 greatest graphic novel of all time, and then it's Watchmen, and then it's Kafka, and then it's The Arrival. This book isn't trying to do that. However, there are lists out there on the internet that exist. For the most part, they're designed to be clickbaity. They're just designed to capture your attention, not really inspire too much thought, but just keep you entertained for a minute as you sit there and go, I'm not sure I agree with that. I actually think this list is better. But for my own part, I just wanted to say, moving forward, that I'm not a big fan of lists, because again, there's always this sort of implied judgment. And especially when it comes to these kinds of lists, we always have to ask ourselves, who is making the list? Who gets to decide what graphic novel is better than others? What exactly is the criteria for making this list? And then 4, is this list something that people are going to sort of approach, or are they going to approach it with a certain amount of... Are they going to approach it with a caveat that this is one person's opinion? There's not a clean answer to this, and again, this is me just running off on a tangent, but it's something I think about a lot whenever I see books and articles like this all the time. If I ever see the word 100, or even just a number and then greatest, I'm going to be dubious right off the bat, and I'm probably going to avoid it. Having said that, though, I don't think you should avoid this book, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is. Okay. Now that I have sort of gone up my own ass and have come out the other side, I can kind of talk now with just the freedom and... allergies, y'all, I swear. Anyway, I can sort of now just sort of get into why I think the 100 Greatest Graphic Novels of All Times is a really good book and definitely a valuable tool. My local comic book shop, Ground Zero Comics, is owned and operated by a guy by the name of David. And he and I have lots of conversations, and sometimes we were reading in a graphic novel appreciation society, the book club that operates out of that shop. We were talking about some early old school comics. I think it was probably something like some of these old Action comics, or it might have been an old X-Men comic. And when I say old, we're talking like possibly late 70s, early 80s. And I pointed out the dialogue's so clunky and they have to repeat everything that happened, and Dave made a keen point, which was everybody's comic book is somebody's first comic book. Meaning, when somebody picks up Watchmen, that may be the first comic book they ever read. When somebody picks up this big hardback copy of Action Comics, that may be their first comic book. When somebody picks up this comic, gotta work on this huge stack here. When somebody picks up this Godzilla, Complete Rulers of the Earth Volume 1, that may be their first comic. And so, a really important thing about a book like this is it can provide a nice sort of framework or starting off point for anybody who's ever been interested in the medium of comics, or somebody who wants to sort of reevaluate what their history or their experience with comics has been. There may have been somebody who's never read a graphic novel but has only ever bought like Archie and Jughead books at the store. Again, some people would go, ugh, Archie and Jughead, really? But it's comics. Everybody's at where they're at and what they've read. This book is really vital because if somebody says, I'm really interested in starting some superhero comic books, but, you know, there's so many out there. How do I even begin? Again, a nice little book like this opens up with a superhero chapter where they talk about The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. And you'll see right here on the opposite side, they provide a cover image for the book so somebody can locate it, a brief sort of summary about what the book is about, how long its lasting impact, and then you'll see here, not just on Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, but also this one here, The Adventures of Superhero Girl. You see the cover of the book, and then a few panels or even an entire page from the book itself. And this is not exclusively just for superheroes. For example, if you look here at Smile by Raina Telgemeier, you have, again, the cover of the book, a small summary article, and then you turn the page, and you get yourself a nice whole page to see what the inside of the comics is going to look like. And it may not seem terribly important, but that's actually a very vital structure for something like a reader's advisory material, because it's easy to look at the cover of the book, and now I feel obliged to offer up the platitude, never judge a book by its cover. which for the record is crap. You should judge a book by its cover, because that's one of the things that's going to help you determine whether or not you want to read it. But at the same time, I get what they were trying to say. Anyway, what's really nice about this book is because most of the times whenever you go to a bookstop as opposed to a bookstore, you know, there's slight difference there. But if you go to, say, a typical comic book shop, most of the time the graphic novels are sealed in plastic or shrink-wrapped in plastic. This is largely so people don't just come in, sit down, and read the book for hours on end and never buy anything. From a retail perspective, it makes sense. From a reader's perspective, it's a tad difficult. That's why a book like this can be really helpful. Because, of course, you can look at a book like It's an Easy Life If You Don't Weaken, and look at the cover and go, oh, that doesn't seem very interesting. I mean, it sounds kind of like a boring book. Why would I ever want to read it? But then, again, you simply turn the page and you observe that the inside of the book looks dramatically different. The pages seem kind of yellowed or oranged, and then the style of the artist itself, you get a real idea of what Seth is and how Seth operates as a cartoonist and why he's so important. Fun fact, I guarantee you one of the next couple of videos for this channel is going to be about this book. I saw it in this book, actually, and was like, what is that? So I picked up a copy. So see, even I am susceptible to little lists like this. And this is something, again, as well, is even if you don't have a specific goal in mind, and again, I apologize for all these S's. I have a speech impediment. I know it hurts y'all's ears. It hurts my ears when I go back and listen and watch these videos. So I'm going to try to work on those, but as always, please forgive my speech impediment. Anyway, a benefit to a book like this is just opening it up and looking through it. Because even if you have no idea really what you're looking for, if I just open the book, turn a couple pages, I turn to a book entitled The Silence of Our Friends. Regular viewers of the channel will note that I actually did a very, very sort of small impromptu video about that book several weeks ago in response to George Floyd's death. Even if you have no idea what that comic book is about, you may be interested simply by opening up this book, looking through some of the panels, or even just reading the description. The benefit to a book like this is that it gives readers an opportunity to just sort of gain curiosity by just sort of picking at random about 100 different graphic novels that have been really big in terms of the publishing industry of comics. The reader is afforded an opportunity for discovery. You can just open this book up, find something, and go, that looks interesting. I might pick up that. So, while this book is kind of an oddity in relation to the other videos in this channel, I wanted to talk about this because reader's advisory material is something that often gets talked about when you talk about nonfiction books or when you talk about fiction books. It isn't always applicable or seemingly applicable when you talk about comics. Again, as always, this just has to go with the long conversations that I've had on this channel about the over-commercialization of comics, the disrespect of the medium of comics, what have you. This book is really great because it's an attempt to sort of gather the best of the best, however we're defining best, and just amass it in one collection to just sort of show somebody who's never read a comic before or never shown interest in a comic before, hey, before you completely write off comics as a genre, maybe just look through this collection, see something you like, find the book, read it, and then decide for yourself whether or not you think comics are a waste of time. They're not. They're awesome. And so, hopefully, that is a good overall argument for the existence of this book. In terms of criticism of the book overall, all I would really offer is this is not exactly just like a sit down on a Friday night and just read. This is clearly a book you pick up, you read a couple pages, and you put it down, and then you get back to reading Godzilla, Complete Rulers of the Earth, because holy crap, this book is so dumb and so stupid, and I love it so much. It's so fun. I mean, God, you've got Godzilla, and the Matthew Broderick Godzilla, too. This isn't just the original Toho version. This gets that Godzilla fighting the original Godzilla. It's so center. This book is not something that you sit down and read for entertainment. This is something you read when you're not really focusing on anything, or you just need something to sort of occupy your time with. It's a small, informative read. This is not an engaging read. And again, in the book's defense, it's not really trying to be that anyway. And then I suppose one other argument with this book is the fact that, for the most part, most of the books in this collection are primarily created by white artists. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, and in fact, there's a whole video about the role that people of color have had in relation to comics production. I mean, again, it's only been in the last decades that we've really begun to see more and more African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinx Americans, what have you, coming forward and making comics and having, not equal right now, but at least just a starting effort and sort of making claims into the medium. The book kind of suffers for that, and there are still plenty of artists in this collection that are people of color who are from the LGBTQ plus community, what have you. It's a mostly white book. And so if you're looking for a lot of books about, say, African American or just simply African comics creators, unfortunately, there's not a lot of them here. Again, a book like this is going to get reprinted sometime in the future, or just remade, or a new version of this will be on the horizon sometime soon. And when it does, there will probably be far more representation in the book. For now, again, this is what we have to work with, and honestly, it would really be nice to check out, or just to have a book of, just say, 100 of the greatest comics and graphic novels by people of color, or by queer authors, what have you. And if I can plug a book for a moment by a person of color, Superman Smashes the Klan. I'm only about 40 pages into this book, and holy crap, it's amazing. It's literally Superman fighting the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, technically they're called the Knights of the Fiery Cross, but I mean, they wear the hoods, they have the red crosses on their chest, it's the Klan. But, so, seriously, check this book out, because it's by the same guy who wrote this book. Again, his name is Jen Luen Young. I apologize if I mispronounced the name. Again, I'm a hick from East Texas. Please forgive me. But this book here, American Born Chinese, is an amazing book. And honestly, I really need to get back and reread this book for the video. He also wrote a book for First Second that got a fair amount of press, called Boxers and Saints. It's this box set right here. Honestly, it was not my favorite one, but it's still definitely worth your time. He has gone forward now, and he's written this amazing book. Check it out. But, if I can focus on the book at hand here, 100 Greatest Graphic Novels, The Good, The Bad, The Epic by Katrina Hill and Alex Langley is worth your time. If you've never gotten interested in comics or never read a comic in your life, check out this book and just read through some of the entries and then track down some of the comics in it. And if you yourself make comics or have been reading comics since before you could walk, definitely check out this book, because it's an opportunity for you to just go through and see, what have you read? What have you not read? Do you agree with the items that are in this collection? Do you agree with their statements, assessments, what have you? Books like this can be kind of galling, because for the most part, they're designed to sort of catch your attention and then move on with your life. But it is still an important effort in terms of the medium of comics, that no longer are comics simply just throwaway books. They're a medium with a deep history that have now impacted the culture and are becoming a staple in our day-to-day lives. So when we see books like this, yes, it's a cheap coffee table book that all of 5 people are probably going to read over the course of their lifetime. But those lists are still important, because they ask the question, what do we consider some of the best comics ever made? And who gets to be on that list? And why do they get to be on that list? And why did those creators take all the time and effort in the first place? Alright, I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for watching. Yeah, this was a weird video. It's not like my usual stuff, but I've had this book on my shelf for a while. I picked it up and I kind of read through it and I was like, this feels like it's video worthy enough. So hey, if you watch the whole thing, thank you. I really appreciate it. Something like this, like I said, you can probably find it at a local comic book shop. I'm not sure if a library... Well, there's probably going to be a library somewhere that has it, so check your local library. If they don't have it, they can probably get it to you through an interlibrary loan. And as always, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Go read Superman Smashes the Klan. And then go read some more comics.